Hello, and we're so happy today to be speaking with Michael Jackson, who's the CEO and EVP for Florida Pharmacy Association here in Florida. So for those of you who may not have seen me before, I'm Dr. Carol Matichka, and I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Jackson, who's going to be speaking to us about something very important, which is advocacy within our profession. So before we get started, Michael, thank you very much for coming and speaking with the students today. This is a very important topic, so I can't thank you enough for that. But can you share a little bit of background about yourself, please?
Yes, I'd be honored to. And to all the students here at University of Florida, it's just an honor to share some of my experiences with you, because a lot of what we do is going to be impactful on your professional careers. Myself personally, I am a Florida licensed pharmacist, originally from Western Pennsylvania, but I now call Florida home. I had practice experience both in veterinary hospital pharmacy as well as human hospital pharmacy, community pharmacy practice. I was also a pharmacy district supervisor for a regional drugstore chain, and I also spent about 3 years in academia. So I really enjoyed working with the students and helping to build and shape their professional careers. Currently, I'm now the administrative manager of the Florida Pharmacy Association. We have about a little over 3,000 members that are scattered throughout the state as well as different parts of the United States. And a lot of what we do is dealing with continuing education and advocacy and helping to provide member services for our members.
Thank you. And I've been fortunate enough to work with FPA and with Michael for several years now. So he's just an unbelievable advocate for our profession in general.
And don't forget, you've spent a lot of time in leadership within the Florida Pharmacy Association,
I have. I've been busy, too. So I encourage everybody to look into leadership of their positions or for their profession in the various organizations. So thank you, Michael.
Great.
Okay, so speaking of political advocacy, can you maybe share what is it exactly?
Well, when you talk about advocacy, this is where, as a profession, you stand before those who make policy on healthcare, and you talk to them about what it is that you do and how you can contribute to quality health. And there's not a lot of knowledge in the general public and within the Florida legislature and in Congress about what pharmacists do. I mean, we're just not something that you turn on the television and you see a reality show about pharmacists. There's not a lot known about how important we are to healthcare.
Very true.
But the biggest spend in healthcare is prescription medications, and it's just amazing to me that most folks really don't know how to take their medications and take it correctly. So that's where we come in as what we perceive to be healthcare providers to help close that particular gap. So in advocacy, because everything is that we do is driven based upon what's written in state laws and federal laws, is heavily dependent upon us making sure that pharmacists are part of the healthcare team and not left out.
Absolutely. Very good. Okay, well, thank you. So maybe can you share how students in particular can become advocates for their profession now, as well as eventually it'll lead into the future, but what can they do now to become part of that process?
Well, for now, the first thing I think I would advocate to students is to, first of all, understand the issues that affect the profession. Now, for our P1 students, maybe not so much so, because the knowledge of all the issues out there may not be as strong now. Over time, when the students do their rotations and they see what's happening in practice, then they begin making the connection. So understand that a lot of what we do is driven by the political landscape and getting engaged. So the first thing I think I would suggest the students to do is consider being a part of their state professional association, like the Florida Pharmacy Association. What that does is that gets them in the information loop, because we will send out on a regular basis late-breaking information that's important to the profession of pharmacy and important for students, because students want to know that by the time they complete their academic training, they have a viable profession that's waiting for them to welcome them into the profession. So becoming members of the Florida Pharmacy Association, for example, we can help get students connected to their state legislators because everyone has a state senator, everyone has a state representative. Right now, students, you may not know who they are, but they are working hard in Tallahassee, passing laws and rules pertaining to what we do as pharmacists. And so it's important that they hear from students who happen to be their constituents.
It's a good thing you bring that up. That's one of the assignments that you guys have is to figure out who those individuals are so we can start making connections early. But thank you.
Right. And one other thing I want to mention too, when we talk about members of the House and the Senate, these are citizens just like you and me. Mm-hmm. They just decided to go into public service and represent people who live in their communities. In some cases, they're nurses. In some cases, they may be physicians. They may be attorneys. They may be funeral home directors and other types of professionals who just wanted to be a public servant and represent their communities. Mm-hmm. But beware that in the Florida legislature, the only qualifications to be a legislator is to have no criminal background, be of 18 years of age, and live in the area where they're representing. There are no pharmacists serving in the Florida legislature today and have not been since November of 2000. And so, we really need, that makes advocacy even that much more important because they have to hear from us as the consuming public on issues pertaining to pharmacy.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about the health fair and legislative days. Now, I know some of the students that are listening to this may have already participated before, but just give us a little bit more information about what exactly occurs and what takes place within that.
Our legislative day and health fair event is perhaps one of the largest events that the Florida Pharmacy Association facilitates on behalf of students and pharmacists in this state. We'll have well over 400 students and pharmacists and technicians that will make the pilgrimage and come to Tallahassee just to see how the passing of laws have an impact on their profession and what the dialogue is going on. And in many cases, what we'll see is that many students who experience sitting at the Capitol, sitting in a committee hearing and listening to the dialogue about healthcare, listening to the comments about the profession of pharmacy, it gets these students energized. In the beginning, it's, okay, why am I going to Tallahassee? It's not the number one place to go to, especially in March. I'd rather be somewhere else other than Tallahassee, Florida. But after the experience and going to Tallahassee, the students come away with a renewed sense of responsibility to the profession. They begin to realize how little those who make policy understand the profession. So we recognize that was a knowledge gap for members of the House and Senate about pharmacy and felt that, perhaps we need to find a way to bring pharmacy to the Capitol. And that's when we began facilitating the legislative day event in Tallahassee as well as the health fair event. And the intent here was to put on a showcase and demonstrate to a legislator, to a policymaker, to a staffer, how important pharmacists are in the provision of healthcare services and how we're an integral part of the healthcare team. Mm-hmm. And it is because of these kinds of events that the mindset of those in Tallahassee now have a new appreciation of what pharmacists can do and why it's so important for us to be there. And we're going to talk about it maybe towards the end of our presentation,
Sure.
What happens if we don't become involved.
Right, and I wholeheartedly agree. And I look back to the days before we could immunize and just the impact we made going to Tallahassee and all the students there. But it's just impressive what we can do as a team, essentially.
And students are probably the most vocal when it comes to advocates. There are a number of the issues, and you just mentioned those immunization services. Mm-hmm. We've had students who worked with us on that project, and I would say, particularly here at the University of Florida, if it wasn't for the students, we'd still be fighting for that issue right now. We had one student that did some research for us and checked some databases out there and discovered through their research that Florida was ranked 49th out of 50 states for seniors over the age of 60 that gotten an immunization for influenza. And with data like that, sharing with members of the House and Senate, they were appalled and wanted to know what in pharmacy we can do to fix that. And our answer simply was change the Practice Act to allow pharmacists to provide immunization services, and we can change that statistic. And we did. We did an awesome job.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. So do you want to speak a little bit about that? Or we've kind of talked about that. Maybe you can just give students a perspective of when that'll take place and sort of what happens on each day.
Okay. So since 2002, we've been doing this project, and next year, our plans, it's already scheduled on the calendar for March 11th. I think the plans are to assemble in Tallahassee on the evening of March 11th. That's on a Monday.
Mark your calendars.
And probably get together and have a pizza and policy discussion where this is where we have all schools from around the state of Florida, all 7 of them, just converging on Tallahassee and hovering around pizza and Coca-Cola and just talking about the issues and helping to prepare students for what they're going to experience. Then our plans are on March the 12th, beginning in the morning, as long as everything is lined up, we have already reserved the second floor of the rotunda in the Capitol to set up tables and stations where we'll do health fair screenings, cholesterol screenings, diabetes testing, patient counseling, and all that stuff that's important for patients. And what's really interesting, when we've done this in the past, we've actually identified a number of staffers and legislators who had health risks. And I think in one case, we actually referred someone to the hospital because their blood pressure was just so amazingly high. We had to do something. We couldn't let them just not get intervention there. And then on Wednesday is when we actually have planned the legislative day visits. You have an opportunity to sit on committees and councils that are going on in Tallahassee, and you also have an opportunity to visit with your state legislator and one-on-one having conversations with them about your health. And you never can tell who's going to show up in some of these meetings.
Right. It's an awesome experience. Thank you.
So, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, you never can tell who's going to show up. And these are students who were out in the quadrangle area of the Capitol, and they were walking around, and they saw some fellow walking around with a suit, and he had other folks in a suit around him, and they said, he looks important, let's take a picture with him. And these are University of Florida students that were up on the 22nd floor of the Capitol just touring the building, and they saw this same gentleman there, and they thought he looked important, and they took his picture, and they came back to me, and they said, who is this guy? I said, well, it's the governor of the state of Florida you took a picture with. And so here we have the governor presenting to the Florida Pharmacy Association a proclamation declaring October as American Pharmacist Month, which will start next month.
Very, very cool. Thank you. And so this is great, too, some of the opportunities they have to actually visit the chambers and see the process in action. So anything you want to mention in that regards?
For those of you who are viewing this is probably my most memorable picture that we took. It's very rare that you actually get an opportunity to get inside the Senate chambers. We had a legislator that was very close to the Florida Pharmacy Association, and I just casually mentioned to him, is there an opportunity to do a tour of the Senate chambers? And he said, yeah, sure, I'll set that up. And so next thing I know, we had all these students that got inside the Senate chamber, and this legislator actually facilitated a debate session for these students. And so they put a healthcare issue on the table and asked the students to sit in each one of those desks where decisions are made, and there's a red button for no and a green button for yes, and I think there's a yellow button for abstain. And so we had an opportunity for having discussion back and forth, and it's the same chambers that you see on nightly news during the legislative session. And what we found was fascinating, that even within our own profession, we could not agree on some of the issues. And so just imagine what these legislators are going to have a problem with, because they are not pharmacists, and we can't agree on some of the issues on our own. But this is a fascinating picture, and these students were just totally excited about having an opportunity to be inside the chambers. Now, it's not guaranteed we're going to have that opportunity again, but we'll give it a try and see.
And the students couldn't stop talking about it. It was amazing. So that was great that you facilitated that as well. So speaking of the process, if you will, how if somebody has an idea, how does it actually become a law?
Well, usually laws are created for purposes of establishing order and compliance, and to remove chaos from society. So, and that's why we have the profession of pharmacy is here, because a law says that no one can practice the profession of pharmacy other than someone who's trained, has completed their academic training, has passed an examination, and has been given a license by the state. So, and there are a lot of things that we get to do, and there's a lot of things that we want to do but don't get to do. So the issue comes up is what happens when there's a need to make a change. The profession of pharmacy needs to grow beyond what we're able to do now. So we're the experts when it comes to prescription drug therapy, yet we do not have the ability to initiate, modify, or discontinue prescription drug therapy. We have to wait until another healthcare provider writes an order for us to utilize our knowledge. And so why not make a change in the laws that will allow a pharmacist to initiate, modify, and discontinue prescription drug therapy, because we're the experts at doing that. Mm-hmm. Many pharmacists in other countries can do that, except for here in the United States. Many pharmacists in some other states can initiate, modify, and discontinue prescription drug therapy in collaboration with physician providers. So it becomes an idea. It starts within a local affiliated organization, such as the Alachua County Association of Pharmacists or the Academy of Student Pharmacy Practice here at the University of Florida, where they come up with an idea, they come up with a concept, and they bring it to our House of Delegates. And then there's discussion and debate in our House of Delegates, and if the House adopts it as policy, then it goes to our leadership, and our leadership then presents it to our Government Affairs Committee, who begins an action plan to advocate before the Florida legislature. Then the next step is to identify a House and a Senate sponsor of the bill, because they are the ones that are going to have to change the laws. Once the bill is filed, it's presented to various committees at the House, and then there is debate on those pieces of legislation. Hopefully, the debate is not contentious. The debate is straightforward, but sometimes you'll find other groups that may not agree with the position that we're taking, and they may argue against it. So it's up to us to argue in favor of it. And one of the things that we look at in terms of whether or not a bill is going to be found favorable or not is, does it reduce the size of government? Does it reduce taxes? Does it promote personal responsibility? Does it promote individual freedom? Does it empower families to make decisions? Does it do a lot of things that's beneficial to society as a whole? Mm-hmm. And typically our issues are those parameters. So that's the good thing about it. And in many cases, our argument is a sound argument because it just makes sense.
Right.
And so then, should a bill go through the committee process and it's found favorable through the committees, it may get an amendment that's tacked onto it that might route it to another committee, and then we have to go through that process all over again. But if it's found favorable by the committees in the House and the Senate, and the bills look like each other, and the House and the Senate passes the bills, then the next step, it goes to the governor, and the governor has three choices: to either sign the legislation into law, or he can not sign the legislation. It will become law without his signature. Or if he feels a piece of legislation is forcing the executive branch of government to do something that's really against the Constitution, that it's not budget neutral, there's no way to implement it, then he may veto the bill and it won't become law. However, the legislature can override the governor's veto by a supermajority vote, but it has to be done in both chambers.
And there's so many steps involved, which students may not realize necessarily, and this is why it's so important to be able to make a difference where you can, and even starting at this position. Certainly things that you can do.
Oh, yeah. Less than 6% of all bills ever filed ever get signed by the governor. And so there are over 3,000 bills that were filed last year, and I think probably about 150 to 200 bills actually got to the governor's desk.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, so we speak about being able to speak with our legislators, and I know you spoke a little bit also about they are regular people, which absolutely, I completely agree with you. But I think students still are a little bit nervous about that process and how to speak with them. So from your years of experience, can you maybe share what they can think about when they're going into this?
Very good, Dr. Wojtyszko. I think for the students to help guide you through this process and overcoming the nervousness of speaking to someone that you've seen on your TV set on the news at night, I think it's more difficult to talk to patients about their health than it is to talk to legislators, because legislators know next to nothing about what pharmacy is all about. And these are individuals who are in your community. They are merchants in your community. They're regular folks, just like you and I. As a matter of fact, one of the candidates for governor goes to my church. And so I speak to him all the time. So our legislators, mainly the main thing is to try to get to know who they are and where their offices are. So if you're living here in Gainesville, your representative is somewhere in the area, they have office hours, they have a staff. There's nothing wrong with, as a group of students, just going by and visit their office and say, hey, I'd like to speak to Representative so-and-so about some pharmacy issues. Legislators love talking to students because you have a fresh set of thinking, a fresh set of ideas, and they will listen to you more than they'll listen to a lobbyist in Tallahassee, because you're important, you're a voter, and you are their boss, and you're the ones that's going to help them. So know your legislators, and there's a website that you go to find out who they are. Understand the legislative process. Brief your legislators before they come to Tallahassee. They come to Tallahassee several times of the year. The session starts in March and will end the first weekend in May. And so you want to have conversation with them while they're here in your hometown area before they come to Tallahassee. Support their campaigning right now. And I know you're probably getting robocalls on your cell phone. You're probably getting material in your mailbox. Vote for me. I'm the great candidate for you. So help to understand more what they're all about. Right. And I think there's nothing wrong with asking them questions. What do you know about pharmacy? And they may be truthful for you, and they may say, I have no idea what pharmacy is all about. To you as students, that should give you an opportunity to have a nice conversation with them about the merits and benefits of pharmacy.
And just very quickly, before we get back into this, I think we often think about the national candidates more than we think about our state candidates and our local representatives, and how important that is to vote for those individuals as well, and to understand what their positions are and what an impact they can make, particularly on our profession. So I really want to reiterate, getting to know those local folks can have a huge impact on your profession and being able to meet with them. So just
Absolutely.
Pointing that out.
And one thing you may discover, that if you're having a conversation with a legislator, they may already have an opinion on an issue, and in some cases their opinion may not align with your opinion. So just understand that sometimes it's okay to agree to disagree. Mm-hmm. I know sometimes, especially on some of our issues that we're extremely passionate about, you have to withhold your desire to say hurtful things, because sometimes that can work against you. But what your role is to really help them understand the benefits of what we do as pharmacists, and how it can help consumers, how it can help improve their health. At some point in time, they're going to get it, and they're going to say, well, I think I understand how important you are now.
Right. And it's important to meet with those who agree with you and those who don't agree with you, because you don't know whose mind you can change.
Great.
So, absolutely.
You can write letters to members of your legislators, and you can do it as a group. And there's nothing wrong with the ASP chapter here in Gainesville, the ASP chapter at Lake Nona, the ASP chapter in Jacksonville, to do group letters to their legislators on a particular issue that you're passionate about. And when you do write a letter as a group, that's one letter that you send, or as individuals, my recommendation is don't write one standard letter and then copy it and everybody put your name on it. Usually it has a much greater impact if everyone writes their own letter. You can use the core issues in your letter to talk about how you support pharmacists' ability to be able to initiate, modify, and prescription drug therapy, but you explain why, as it affects you personally. Why do you think that this is important? That way, if they see one letter that comes into their office and it says something, and they see another letter that comes in their office but it says something different, but the meaning is the same, then they would say that, hey, this has district-wide implications and this is important. Maybe I need to pay attention to this.
Very good.
And if you want information on the issues, we do have a website at www.pharmview.com, and there's not a lot of information on there now because we're waiting on the new session to start, and the session will start after the election season is over this November.
Thank you for that. And I love this saying here, price of apathy is to be ruled by evil men.
Yes, that's a Plato comment there, and this one I like because it was actually a quote given to us by a College of Pharmacy professor that wrote an article in one of our journals that you're the journal chair of. And he said, failure to get involved in healthcare policy making empowers others to determine your future. Now you think about that and what major impact that has. If we're not engaged in the advocacy process, if we're not seeing what our legislators are doing in Tallahassee, if we're not going to Tallahassee and watching what they're doing, somebody else is, and somebody else may not have our professional interest at heart or may not have the interest of our patients at heart. And so we have to be a part of this or somebody else is going to determine that for us.
Absolutely. And understand what they're thinking and why they're making those laws or not approving the ones that we bring forward is very, very important just to be able to counteract potentially what they're thinking. So extremely important. And unfortunately, we do see that. We do see individuals who tend to sit back and complain about it. But then if they could just get in there and make that difference, it could make all the difference in the world. So
yes, a lobbyist told me one time in Tallahassee that you're either at the table or you're on the menu. I'd much rather be at the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. I completely agree with you there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about how even if they can't attend legislative days, they can certainly still write to their legislator. They can also meet with them within their community, which I think is another very important piece. But let's talk about maybe what we're looking at for this coming year so that they have an idea of where we should be focusing, especially in pharmacy.
Okay, and within our profession as an organization, annually we meet at our convention. We just had one at the Hyatt Regency in Bonita Springs, and our next convention will be next summer in Fort Lauderdale. Usually at this convention is where we come up with a thought process on what issues that we would like to try to address on behalf of our members. And the issues come to us from our various student chapters and regional associations that want certain things taken care of. And so then we have a large list of things that need to be done. But we don't have a sizable budget to do everything. And so this is where the leadership of the association would, through its Government Affairs Committee, began to prioritize the most critical things that have to be done first. So we have before you on the screen here a list of some of the key things that we have labeled as high priority. Now, for students, there's not a lot known about what a PBM is. But if you're going into pharmacy practice, at some point in time, you're going to realize that PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers, have a major impact on what we do and how we are compensated as pharmacists. So we have to be engaged on that particular issue. We understand and we feel that the PBM industry is not very transparent. There's some things that are going on that we would like to advocate for more transparency and have state government have more oversight over what PBMs do. Then there's the issue of the debate over telehealth, telepharmacy, remote dispensing. those terms are being interchanged, and for students, there's some good and there's some not so good with those kinds of proposals. So when you think about telehealth or telepharmacy, that is where me as a pharmacist is having a conversation with you as a patient about your health and using technology to do that, just like we're using technology to share our conversation with you as students, which is a neat way of learning. But there are proposals out there that's trying to use technology like that for purposes of operating and managing a pharmacy. So the concepts and the ideas are about how you can operate a pharmacy without a pharmacist having to be there. And our association has a lot of difficulty endorsing and supporting anything like that. As a matter of fact, we actually oppose that, and that comes up to the concept behind remote supervision of pharmacy technicians. So you have a pharmacy located somewhere in a rural area of Florida, and you staff it with pharmacy technicians, and everything that the technician does is supervised by a pharmacist in another location. So we like the idea of telepharmacy and telehealth. We think that if you're trying to use telepharmacy and telehealth to manage and administer and operate a pharmacy, that it's a little bit of a stretch for something like that to work properly, and we couldn't support that. Then there are proposals that, for example, we have the ability to provide immunization services to patients, and we have the ability to monitor their care. And what happens if a patient already has influenza? They can come to a pharmacy, and there's a simple test that we can do, and there's medications that's time sensitive that we can give them as a pharmacist that can help with their symptoms. But the problem is we can't give that medication because we don't have the authority to prescribe. And so there's proposals to give pharmacists that ability to be able to assess patients. I didn't say diagnosis. I said assess patients to determine whether or not they have the symptoms of the flu and start them on Tamiflu or similar type prescription drug medications. Then there's a proposal that we're working with the Florida Society of Health Systems Pharmacists to actually have pharmacists and physicians collaborate together. Not a novel concept.
Nope.
The collaboration that's going on now here in academia and education is amazing. Here at the University of Florida, we have medical students, we have pharmacy students that are side by side doing some very innovative kinds of patient care that, in our opinion, is worthy of some type of Pulitzer Prize or Nobel Prize for what you're doing here. And so why not take that concept that you have in an academic controlled environment and put that in community and institutional pharmacy practice setting? And all it takes is a small change in the Florida laws that will allow for that. And we think that will improve patient outcomes and improve patient care.
Absolutely.
And then we believe that there are things out there that prevent patients from using the pharmacy of their choice. A lot of consumers like the pharmacy that they're using, but their health plan may force them to go to another pharmacy, and that's not right. We think if a patient and a pharmacist have established a good working relationship, they should continue on with each other. And when the patient's health plan changes, the patient should be entitled to stay with their pharmacist, just like they should be entitled to stay with their dentist, just like they should be entitled to stay with their physician. We all agree to that.
Completely agree.
Then we have other things. The list, again, is very long. We'd like to work on. But we have it more of a middle priority because the high priority things are where we have to spend the majority of the scant resources that we have. So this year there was a bill that passed that made some major changes on the prescribing and dispensing of opioid drugs. And for our P4 students that are out there, you're probably now experiencing those changes. There are probably going to be some subtle changes that may occur as a result of the passage of that very large bill last year. And so we're going to have to watch for whatever changes that may occur. And then we're also seeing where in community pharmacy practice that there's the utilization of something called metrics. And that's difficult especially for students to understand, but to really boil it down to what metrics are is that you have been allocated a certain amount of time to spend with a patient. And when that time's up, you have to move on to the next patient. Well, patients are different. Some patients require more time than others. And to use metrics as a penalty tool for pharmacists, healthcare providers, we think that's probably not the way to go. And if you want to know a little bit more about metrics in your journal, there's an article that I've written that will show up in the in the September issue of Florida Pharmacy Today, and I invite all students to read that.
Excellent.
Then we're also going to advocate for continuity of care. You heard about the hurricanes that have happened in the Carolinas and the major impact there. And during that time period, the governor of the state of Florida, even though we weren't impacted by that hurricane, the governor declared a state of emergency, which gave pharmacists new authority to do certain kinds of things to help evacuees from those states with their prescription medications, because some patients had to escape the Carolinas with nothing but what they had, and they left their prescription medication behind. Well, with this change in law by the governor declaring a state of emergency, we can give up to a 30-day supply of certain prescription medications that are needed for life-sustaining care, and that expands beyond just the 3-day supply that currently Florida law allows. Well, we think if pharmacists are allowed to do that when a state of emergency is declared, why not give them that authority to do that? Because an emergency geographically for a particular geographic area is yes indeed an emergency, but an individual can have an emergency too.
Absolutely.
So it just makes sense to us.
Right.
Then there's a vaccine safety program that pharmacists are required to do to maintain their vaccine registry, and the only provider that you can go to for that program is the state's medical association. And so we believe that ACPE providers, which includes the pharmacy schools, the Florida Pharmacy Association, and other organizations that are ACP accredited, should be able to offer that program. And I think we can do a good job doing that.
Yeah.
Then there are other things as well too. I won't go into detail. Certainly, if students, you have questions about some of these specific issues, watch our website, because once the issues are published, are out there, the bills are filed, we'll probably include information about that legislation, and we'll include talking points to help you through the process.
Great. And if they attend legislative days, that's where that pizza and policy night is very important to give an update as well of what's going on.
Absolutely. And then we have low priority issues. Some may think that, well, medical marijuana is a high priority issue. We should pay more attention to that. But there are certain dynamics behind medical marijuana that prevent pharmacists from being engaged in that, and that's because it's still considered a Schedule I controlled substance. And as a pharmacist, unless you're part of an exempted group, you can't be an active participant in medical marijuana, though I think it's an opportunity for pharmacists to do consulting work in that area, and I believe some pharmacists are helping out with many of these dispensing organizations to do that. And then the other things are probably a little complex to talk about in this session, but certainly I'm available to answer any questions you might have about that.
Great. Thank you.
Then there are emerging issues. For example, there are proposals that have actually appeared before our State Board of Pharmacy, and by the way, your association. We do visit with the board meetings, and I think on occasion the board has met here in Alachua County, and some students may have had an opportunity to attend one of those board meetings. We've actually seen proposals before the board that will set up automated pharmacies or automated dispensing machines in various areas, and the intent was to try to look at Florida laws to allow for that. Currently, Florida laws don't allow for that, so we're going to be monitoring some of these emerging issues.
Those are great points, and I'm glad you brought all of that up, because I think that students, they get very busy. They've got the next exam coming up, but these big picture issues are really something to think about, because we teach them all about pharmacy, but once they get out and they're practicing, this is where the impact really comes into play in making a difference, is looking at what all of these little or even large, some of these issues and bills that are being placed before them, and how they can actually mold that is so important. So thank you for sharing that. I know one of the big issues that we've discussed in the past, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this actually in the active learning session, is collaborative practice. So maybe you can just give a little bit of background in regards to collaborative practice, where we are, and what our goal is for the year.
This is probably the most exciting issue that a professional organization can undertake because it creates a major dynamic and major change in the profession of pharmacy. And oddly enough, it is an area that I think as pharmacists, we are doing this anyway. Our problem is our state laws have not caught up to the practice of pharmacy. Our state laws have not caught up with pharmacy education. When I practiced pharmacy, and it's been a while since I've been in a pharmacy, but even when I practiced pharmacy, I did a form of collaborative practice. And it was simply a patient comes into my pharmacy and they're on a medication that they shouldn't be on, or they need to be on a medication that they're not on. And of course, under our current laws, in order for a change to take place, I have to make a phone call to the patient's physician provider and talk to them about what I'm seeing in the pharmacy and why I believe the change should occur. And it's really interesting that when I practice pharmacy and I talk to these physicians, the answer I usually get was, well, why are you calling me?
Why don't you just do it?
Just do it.
Right.
And in some cases I said, well, I wish I could, but our laws don't really give me that kind of authority. I have to have your authority to do that. And in many cases, I would have a relationship with a physician that would say, just call me afterwards and just take care of the patient. A patient might have diabetes, and I'm monitoring them on insulin, and then I can see the peaks and troughs, and I know where the changes have to take place, or the Coumadin clinics that we do. That's all part of collaborative practice, where you're working under a protocol arrangement that a physician signs off on and says, okay, when these things occur, please do this. And that's collaborative practice. And that's a common thing.
Absolutely, very common. And when I was in an anti-coag clinic, once the physicians got to know you and saw what you were doing and how you were handling it, was basically like, please just take care of that for me. That's excellent. So I believe there are a lot of physicians who really would like to see more of this.
Yeah, especially when patients see their pharmacist. Probably in many instances more frequently they'll see their physician. You go and visit your doctor once every 6 months. You'll see your pharmacist in some cases every month. And we see the changes and we can fix changes. We just need to make some changes in our Practice Act and our rules to take advantage of our skills and our abilities.
Absolutely.
And we talked about that.
We did.
I think we talked about that too.
We did, which is great. I'm glad we've gotten through a lot of this. These are very good points and good information for everybody to have. I love this. You can.
I usually put this issue before the one thing that I think has really inspired our members to get heavily involved in the issues. And so the issue really is about remote dispensing pharmacies. And I talked about that earlier, but in these slides that you see before you are the details behind that legislation. And if you have an opportunity to see these details, or you want to know more about it, we will be publishing more information in our website. And so on a pharmacist provider status is something that I think going on now in Washington, D.C. Currently, just about every healthcare provider in America, which includes nurses, dentists, doctors, podiatrists, and other types of healthcare workers, are classified as healthcare providers under the Social Security Act. Strangely enough, pharmacists are not listed there.
So unfortunate, yep.
So there are two bills now before Congress, but this particular session of Congress is about to end because we're in an election season. And so the bill numbers after, I think, November or December are probably going to change. The majority of members of the House are sponsors, and I think probably 20 out of the 26 members of the Florida congressional delegation have signed on as co-sponsors. Senator Nelson is a co-sponsor of this legislation. Senator Rubio, we've had conversations with him. He's not signed on yet, but we're still having conversations with him.
Need some letters.
Need some letters, need some conversations. But what it does, if this were to pass, it would recognize pharmacists as healthcare providers. And with that recognition, with any laws that we change here in the state of Florida that allow us to use our skills and abilities, we could be compensated for what we do if we're designated as a healthcare provider.
It's fantastic.
Now, we have an advocacy team in Tallahassee, and that's our lobbyist and our legal team. It's hard to do what we do without these consultants to navigate through this sausage making of laws and bills, and we appreciate their hard work. And so as students, they may want to understand how to get information on some of the issues. So on our website, you see farmview.com, and then you'll see the Legislative Advocacy Center on the screen. So you select that menu item, and it will take you to this screen where a lot of our pharmacy issues are located. And we even have sample letters that pharmacy students can use as a template to reach out to their state legislators. And I even have a link here that will take them to where they can find out who their legislator is. The only thing they need to know is the name, their address. And once you know your address, our site will help you find out who your particular state legislator is. And so if you want to get information quickly, and again, as a student member of the Florida Pharmacy Association, which we encourage students to join, you'll get in our email mailing list. And so as things emerge out, we'll send you what's known as the stat news on emerging things that we see. And so many of our students, email is kind of not your favorite thing to get these days because you get so much of it.
Right.
So you want to get something faster. So we have a feed from our website. And all you have to do is sign up to receive the feed. So every time we post something in there, it will send you a message to your smartphone letting you know that there's new information posted on farmview.com. And so maybe that's not fast enough for students, because we know students get a lot of information from different places, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, places like that. So we do have a Facebook and Twitter account. We just ask the students to go out and like us on Facebook and like us on Twitter. And then usually when we post things, we'll be sending it out to them as well, too. So some students may say, well, social media is not fast enough for me. It needs to be something faster. So if you want it, when I know it, get on board an airplane, come to Tallahassee, and walk the halls with me, and you'll know it the moment that I know it, that things are happening.
Absolutely. So, just finishing up in regards to what do they need to do. We've said a lot of various things here throughout this lecture, so let's just kind of finish it up with what can the students do in regards to making sure that these laws are written and written well. Well,
number one, to just kind of summarize everything, know the issues. Know what's going on out there. And if you're not sure of the issues, you have a question on the issue, don't assume that you have it right. It's always a good idea to reach out to a faculty member here at UF to get a better understanding, or another member of the Florida Pharmacy Association, definitely someone in FPA leadership. And I get calls all the time in Tallahassee from students on the issues, and I have no problems with answering your calls and helping you through this process, because I'd rather you know more about this stuff than me anyway. And the next step, I think, is to come out of your comfort zone and not be shy about having a conversation with your state legislator or your congressman. And again, they're common people. They're just like you and I. And they have lives just like you and I. And they're approachable people, and they want to know from their constituents what's going on. And I think meeting with a group of students, inviting the students to an ASP event here on campus or in Jacksonville or at Lake Nona, I think would be an excellent thing to do for the students. And participate in the election. Vote. Be an active member, and not only do you vote, but don't forget about them after you vote.
Right.
Because what it is you're hiring these individuals to represent your interest, and they should be all a part of what it is that you do. And so there's this perception that, somebody else will take care of this. And we need to know who somebody is.
Right.
Okay. This is somebody who has a PharmD degree. Okay, just a blank face there. And somebody used to live in Hillsborough County or some county somewhere in Florida. Everybody was waiting for somebody to do it. Somebody retired and moved to Detroit and is working part-time as a cement truck driver. So the somebody has got to be us. We have to advocate for ourselves. Nobody else is going to do that for us. We are somebody. We are part of the advocacy team. And our students make a viable part of our advocacy team.
I can't agree with you more there. And I love that statement too. It's the power of few, and it really is. Just a few people can make that impact, but you can't wait. You can't wait for somebody else to do it. Really have to make sure you're heard.
It's not uncommon for me to sit down and talk with a legislator in Tallahassee about an issue, and the legislator will understand what I'm talking about, but he or she will say, I get what you're trying to say, but I have a constituent at home that's a pharmacist. Let me run it by them first and see what they say. And I would say, please do, because I'm sure that they would support this particular issue. And I've seen where a relationship that a single pharmacist or pharmacy student has with their legislator can make a yes or no vote difference in a particular committee. It has happened, and it's not uncommon that happens.
Very good. Very good. Well, Michael, I can't thank you enough, and certainly, like we've said a bunch of times, is that you can change their mind. They exist for us, and our profession exists because of what the Florida legislature does. So we really, really need to make that impact. And having you there in Tallahassee and knowing that you're on our team and really making such an impact is, I think, huge and comforts a lot of individuals, but we need you guys too. So there's only one Michael. There's only one Mr. Jackson.
I'm just a facilitator. The important people who make all this stuff happen, who makes the successes occur in Tallahassee, are the students, the member pharmacists, the faculty here at University of Florida. We've been blessed to have a very strong working relationship. We have a very viable and actually intensive leadership team that is working hard on the behalf of our members to do the right things, to make things happen in Tallahassee. And it makes a world of a difference. Engagement is so important. And
Absolutely.
It can make a difference between a very successful campaign and a not so very successful campaign.
Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you. All right. Well, guys, I want to say thank you to the students for listening. And just a reminder, Legislative Days is coming up. I hope we've convinced you on how important Legislative Days is. And so hopefully, we do our best to avoid any classes if we can on those days to make sure that you can attend March 12th and 13th. But overall, just thank you, and thank you especially, Mr. Jackson, for all your hard work and for coming here and speaking to the students. Like I said, I think they are happy to hear of all that you're doing, but we know you need help too, and really they can make such a huge difference. And I think you've really honed in on that and been able to provide that information. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good luck to your students.
All right. Take care.